like to call to order a special City County Council meeting for Wednesday, September the 16th. Our first item of business will be our prayer and pledge of allegiance, and that will be performed by and done by Assistant Clerk Angela Gonzalez.
Let us pray. Father, I thank you for these public servants gathered here this evening to consider much needed resources to address health and safety issues during this pandemic. Lord, continue to lift them up and give them strength and stamina to consistently carry out their duties and to make decisions that will ensure safety, peace of mind, and a better quality of life for all citizens in all communities across the city. As always, I thank you, Lord, for your mercy, grace, and love, and I pray that we can all, in turn, show the same to others. In the name of Jesus, I pray your blessings on those gathered here. Amen. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Madam Clerk, would you do a roll call for us?
Thank you, Mr. President. Councilor Adamson.
Councilor Adamson, present.
Councilor Ane.
Councilor Ane, present.
Councilor Bain.
Councilor Bain, present.
Councilor Barth.
Barth, present.
Councilor Boots.
Boots, present.
Councilor Brown.
Councilor Brown, present.
Councilor Carlino.
Councilor Carlino, present.
Councilor Dilk.
Councilor Dilk, present.
Councilor Ethan Evans.
Councilor Ethan Evans, present.
Councilor Jared Evans.
Councilor Jared Evans, present.
Councilor Graves.
Councilor Graves, present.
Councilor Gray. Councilor Gray.
Councilor Gray.
Councilor Hart.
Councilor Hart, present.
Councilor Jackson.
Councilor Jackson, present.
Councilor Jones.
Councilor Jones, present.
Councilor Larison.
Councilor Larison, present.
Councilor Lewis.
Councilor Lewis, present.
Councilor Mascari.
Councilor Mascari, present.
Councilor McCormick.
Councilor McCormick, present.
Councilor Mowry.
Councilor Mowry, present.
Councilor Oliver. Councilor Oliver.
Councilor Oliver, present.
Thank you. Councilor Osley.
Councilor Osley, present.
Councilor Potts.
Councilor Potts, present.
Councilor Ray.
Councilor Ray, present.
Councilor Robinson.
Councilor Leroy Robinson, present.
Thank you, Mr. President. All councilors are in attendance.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. The next item on the agenda is adoption of the agenda. Do I have consent?
Mr. President,
Thank you very much. This evening we have with us.
Mr. President,
Yes, who is that?
I need to move to amend the agenda.
Yes, Vice President Adamson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move to amend the agenda to advance proposal number 284, 2020, currently in the introduction of proposals to special orders public hearing for action this evening. There are timing issues regarding this proposal that require passage before the next full council meeting. And I move.
Second, Councilor.
Thank you very much for the motion and the second. I will ask the clerk to please do a roll call.
Thank you, Mr. President. Councilor Adamson.
Councilor Adamson, aye.
Councilor Ane.
Councilor Ane, aye.
Councilor Bain.
Can you come back to me? I need to consult TK on something real quick.
Sure. Councilor Barth.
Barth, aye.
Counselor Boots,
Counselor Boots, aye.
Counselor Brown,
Sorry, Counselor Brown, aye.
thank you. Counselor Carlino,
Counselor Carlino, aye.
Counselor Dilk,
Counselor Dilk, aye.
Counselor Ethan Evans,
Counselor Ethan Evans, aye.
Counselor Jared Evans,
Counselor Jared Evans, aye.
Counselor Graves,
Counselor Graves, aye.
Counselor Gray,
Counselor Gray, aye.
Counselor Hart,
Counselor Hart, aye.
Counselor Jackson,
Jackson, aye.
Counselor Jones,
Counselor Jones, aye.
Counselor Larison,
Counselor Larison, aye.
Counselor Lewis,
Counselor Lewis, aye.
Counselor Mascari,
Counselor Mascari, aye.
Counselor McCormick,
McCormick, aye.
Counselor Mowry,
Counselor Mallory, aye.
Counselor Oliver,
Oliver, aye.
Counselor Osily, Counselor Osily,
Oakley, aye.
Counselor Potts,
Counselor Potts, aye.
Counselor Ray,
Counselor Ray, aye.
Counselor Robinson,
Counselor Robinson, aye.
Counselor Bain,
Counselor Bain, aye.
thank you, Mr. President. The vote is unanimous, all 25.
All right, thank you very much, Madam Clerk. This evening, we have with us the mayor of the city of Indianapolis to make remarks. I would like to ask him to come forward. Mayor Joseph Hogsett.
President Osily, Vice President Adamson, leaders Lewis and Mowry. Thank you for the opportunity to address the City County Council this evening. As you know, it's not exactly normal for me to personally introduce a fiscal ordinance before the full council. It also isn't normal for this body to convene an emergency meeting to consider and pass a matter in just one night. But I don't need to tell you that these are not normal times for the city of Indianapolis. In the last 6 months, nearly 200,000 tests have been administered in Marion County, and more than 20,000 of our neighbors have contracted COVID-19. More than 750 of our neighbors have perished. Hundreds of businesses have been shuttered, many of them permanently. It's easy to read these statistics and to become numb to the toll that this global pandemic has had in Indianapolis. We cannot fall victim to that impulse, though. This virus presents as much a clear and present danger to our city today as it did in March. Only through collective vigilance can we preserve the steps toward normalcy that we have managed in recent months. Those steps were made by coming together as one city to lift up our neighbors, to lift up our neighborhoods, and by recognizing that we all truly are in this together. We received a huge lift in March when the United States Congress passed the CARES Act, which provided an injection of resources to residents, businesses, and our local government. Expanded unemployment benefits, paycheck protection program loans, stimulus checks that helped families make rent and car payments, and $168 million in coronavirus relief funds intended to address the short-term effects of a virus that we are still struggling to understand. I can't say enough how valuable this congressional action was and how important it was that our delegation didn't just act, but acted quickly to respond to the needs of their constituents. So I want to specifically thank Congressman Andre Carson, Congresswoman Susan Brooks for their efforts, along with Senator Todd Young, whose leadership on the Small Business Subcommittee has been most appreciated. Since then, our administration and this council have done our part to decisively deploy those federal dollars. Beginning in June, this body approved more than $90 million in programming made possible through these federal dollars. The visible reminders of this work are not hard to find. $37 million in loans and grants for businesses and nonprofits adversely affected by the pandemic. $20 million in expanded contact tracing and community-based testing in at-risk neighborhoods. $2 million to provide non-congregate hotel accommodations for those neighbors experiencing homelessness. Hundreds of thousands of residents wearing free face coverings. Tens of thousands of families receiving food through community partners. And thousands more receiving rental assistance. As we have unleashed an unprecedented level of funding and services for our neighbors experiencing homelessness. But beyond the things that can be seen, this programming has also benefited the city in ways that aren't as easy to picture, but are just as important. Time and time again, these efforts have transcended mere dollars and cents and provided hope to those in need of a sign that someone cares about their well-being. It is exactly because this programming has been so beneficial that we have sought to be judicious in the deployment of the coronavirus relief funds. We've also been mindful that since the moment the ink was dry on the initial CARES Act in March, the message from Washington has consistently been that more and expanded help would be on the way in the form of additional federal action. It's understandable why leaders in our nation's capital would be so quick to say this. We know far more about this virus now than we did in March. And we are also keenly aware that the effect of COVID-19 are almost certainly going to extend past the original expiration date for these federal funds, which is December the 30th, 2020. What has been less understandable is why, despite all these words, we've yet to see any congressional action materialize in the 6 months since the initial CARES Act was passed. No amount of finger pointing in Washington will make rent for a family in Hawville. No amount of cable news sound bites will put dinner on the table for 2 young kids in Mars Hill. No amount of tweets will help keep our small businesses afloat. I am not interested in the blame game. In local government, as you all appreciate, we don't have that luxury. It's why every single appropriation of these federal dollars has been passed in our city through broad bipartisan cooperation. I don't need to tell all of you this. You live it every day. Our constituents don't care about credit or blame. They just want to see results, and they're tired of waiting. Well, We are tired of waiting too, which is why tonight we're submitting appropriation requests that will fully fund or fully spend all the remaining federal funding in the hopes that these new and expanded programs will provide hope to our neighbors when they need it most. I begin with one of the biggest proposed expenditures. This fiscal calls for an additional $7.5 million in rental assistance for residents who may be at risk of falling behind on payments, bringing our total program budget to $30 million, one of the largest city-run efforts in the nation. This program, unsurprisingly, has revealed tremendous need among renters in Indianapolis. Already, $10.5 million has been provided for more than 4,700 households to stay current with their landlord. That represents nearly $200,000 a day in approved funding for families suffering losses due to this pandemic. We know that this allocation will not be sufficient. The issues driving this potential housing crisis are systemic and will require holistic solutions. But tonight's added funds will go a long way towards serving those who remain on our waiting list. We also know that many are already without shelter in our city. The council has already approved more than $10 million in funding for our homeless neighbors. And this ordinance provides for $5.1 million in winter contingency homeless services. It also sets aside $3.2 million to extend our program offering non-congregate shelter space in area hotels. Together, these efforts will help ensure that we can continue to say that any unsheltered individual in the community that is in need of rapid rehousing and is willing to accept it will have the ability to be sheltered as we work to provide them the permanent supporting housing they deserve. Further measures around food access are also carried over in the form of nearly $3 million for meal services, both at food banks and in our schools. The pandemic has had a devastating effect on small businesses, and nowhere has that effect been felt more than by those in the hospitality industry. Put plainly, every form of business is struggling right now. But with science dictating that we continue to maintain capacity restrictions for our restaurants, bars, and entertainment venues, we must do more to assist these businesses as they await more comprehensive action from our federal government. That's why this ordinance provides an additional $7.5 million in grants for those businesses, which will be administered through a partnership with the Capital Improvement Board. Details of this program will be announced in the coming weeks, but it is our intent to deploy these grants to offset fixed expenses, such as utilities, rent, or mortgage payments for hospitality businesses who are affected and impacted by ongoing public health orders. The stark reality is that many businesses have already closed, and many more will close temporarily or permanently in the months to come. And we know that many neighbors will need support finding their path to a new career. For most middle-class, good-paying jobs, that means post-secondary education. Yet many adults lack the high school degree required for admittance. For that reason, we're continuing to invest in the Rapid GED Equivalency Program, which has currently enrolled 1,400 students. Already, many of those students have completed the program and have moved on either to a job or to a post-secondary program. Meanwhile, students already enrolled in some form of post-secondary education need support to complete their studies, particularly and especially if they are newly out of work. An additional investment in Indy Achieves is included in this funding as we work to provide last dollar in support for Marion County students. Over the last several years, we have seen how Indy Achieves can make a path to a post-secondary degree attainable for low-income or first-generation Marion County students. And we know how important these credentials are for gainful employment. It is more important than ever, therefore, that we continue investing in a better educated and a better qualified workforce in our city. There are more appropriations in this fiscal. Each of them provides a measure of support to our city. Support for arts and cultural institutions to ensure they can survive the devastating blow of canceled shows and halted plans. Internet connectivity in a time when that is the sole contact we may have with schoolmates or job interviewers. Financial and credit repair and coaching surrounding financial and credit repair for those re-entering the community in a time when many find themselves struggling to find or stay housed. There are also important initiatives championed by members of the City County Council, including a mental health public awareness campaign created in partnership with Councilor Hart, as well as an initiative aimed at providing PPE to Marion County teachers, developed and organized with the help of Councilors Carlino and McCormick. In conclusion, Mr. President, I want to be honest with all of the residents of the city of Indianapolis. Tonight, we will consider spending the final $76 million in federal relief funds available to us. But we know that these funds, we know that these dollars, huge as they may seem, are woefully insufficient to address the need in our community. So even as we make this request of our own local fiscal body tonight, our request of those in Washington is just as urgent. Please act to provide additional relief for those suffering in our city. And to those who say that this request amounts to a bailout, I'm not going to mince words. You're correct in all the wrong ways. Expanded federal relief funding isn't about bailing out Democrat or Republican-run cities. It's about bailing out hardworking families who were told that this would be a short-lived public health crisis, but now find themselves in a never-ending battle for survival with no end in sight. These federal relief dollars may have come with an expiration date, but the coronavirus did not. And that disconnect presents a problem with an obvious solution. For tonight's purposes, though, I am proud of what we have collectively done and the way we have done it together, without regard to partisan politics, with a laser focus on assisting those in need. So as I turn it over to staff to make a full presentation on this fiscal ordinance, let me just say once again how appreciative I am of the partnership with all of you and with the partnership provided by our civic and nonprofit allies. Mr. President, thank you very much for the time to address this august body.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. We appreciate having you here this evening. Before we move on to introduction of proposals, do I have consent to adopt the agenda as amended?
Consent.
Very good. Thank you, councilors. The next item on our agenda is introduction of proposals. Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. Proposal number 284, introduced by Councilor Osili, referred to Committee of the Whole. Approves an additional appropriation in the 2020 City Non-Departmental Budget in characters 1, 2, and 3 from the Coronavirus Relief Fund totaling $76,118,316 to fund response efforts addressing the COVID-19 pandemic, including public health measures, programs to combat the secondary economic effects of the pandemic faced by Marion County residents, small businesses, and nonprofits, and expenses incurred or that will be incurred by city county government in response to the pandemic. Mr. President, this concludes the introductions.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Who is here from the administration to speak to proposal number 284?
Good evening, Mr. President. This is Thomas Cook, Mayor Hogshead's Chief of Staff.
Welcome. Thank you.
And I believe through the magic of technology, Taylor Schaefer's login is being given access to share the presentation for this evening. So while that's hopefully occurring, I just want to thank the council for their willingness to reiterate what the mayor said. I know it's not normal for all of you to be called in on one of your few fleeting days off during budget season in order to have a special meeting this evening, but we certainly appreciate your willingness in being flexible with tonight's schedule as we consider this third tranche of appropriating coronavirus relief funds from the CARES Act appropriation. To just begin this evening, it's worth reminding the public and the council of how we came to have this meeting this evening, which was back in March, the Congress passed the CARES Act, which provided, among other things, for direct state and local government allocations of coronavirus relief funding. The city of Indianapolis and Marion County, we applied for both local units of government, received roughly $168 million in CARES Act funding. That funding actually was transmitted to the city toward the end of April, and around that time is when we received the initial Treasury Department guidance on what we could spend those funds on. That Treasury guidance, as the council is aware, has been updated repeatedly over the last 3 or 4 months, generally speaking, to clarify ambiguities or to provide additional guidance on what funds could be used for. We've tried to be responsive to those updated guidance documents, but we took the month of May largely to work with the council and community stakeholders based on that initial guidance to determine what program needs there were and how those programs could be stood up and launched. That culminated in the June City County Council meeting with a $76 million appropriation. Launched a number of the programs that we're going to be discussing this evening, including rental assistance, workforce development initiatives, education initiatives, and our food insecurity and homelessness programming, as well as some small business assistance that's continued to be supplemented, most notably at the August 10th council meeting, in which $16 million in additional CARES Act appropriations were made. That leads us to this evening's presentation, which would be the remainder of the CARES Act funding that we have unappropriated by the council. As the mayor mentioned, we have largely been keeping these funds in reserve in the hopes that additional congressional action would provide us guidance on one of 3 areas that we think would be helpful in terms of this federal funding. One of those being obviously additional funding, one of those being additional flexibility in how we can spend that funding, and then third being additional time in which we can spend it, as we, under federal guidance, currently have to have fully dispensed these dollars by 12/30. And I note that just as a technical matter for the councilors and the public, because that doesn't just mean appropriating the dollars in front of the city county council. It takes quite a lot of time and meaningful effort in order to comply, and we certainly seek at all times to comply with the requirements associated with federal grants. And so that process presents a number of bureaucratic red tape hoops that we have to jump through, not just here at the City County building, but also through the community partners that we're transmitting the money to, and then ultimately in ensuring they're transmitting money to businesses and individuals in a way that complies with that. And so that takes time, in addition to the time to set up these programs. And with just 105 days remaining before the end of the year, it's our intention to have tonight's meeting give us some extra time in which to supplement existing programming and also stand up a few additional programs that haven't been included in prior appropriations. So I'm going to walk through what's contained within the fiscal, and we've put these in some buckets for all of you that I think speak to the major areas of investment that the council has already made. We're going to start with the public health investments. I will say this obviously includes the least amount of money. The reason for that being that by and large, we've been able to address most of our real-time public health needs through a prior council appropriation of roughly $20 million that was made to the Marion County Public Health Department to assist in a number of things up to and including additional contact tracing capacity to supplement the state's efforts, as well as community-based testing sites specifically targeted toward neighborhoods within our city that have been both underserved by public resources in the past and disproportionately affected by COVID-19 over the last few months that we've seen data suggests need exists. But there are three programs tonight that I do want to mention, at least two of them specifically, because they are the direct result of advocacy from city county councilors. We have a PPE program for teachers that will be funded by this initiative, including face masks and hand sanitizers that will be provided to teachers across the community. Many councilors have advocated for this, but I specifically want to thank Councilors Carlino and McCormick for their work on behalf of teachers in Marion County. And I also want to say that a number of councilors have been advocating both within the budget process and within the CRF conversations on the issue of mental health and public awareness of those resources that already exist. This $175,000 public awareness campaign will be launching in the coming weeks. And I specifically want to thank Councilor Michael Paul Hart for his work. He's been a tireless advocate on the need for these resources, and his work has been very much appreciated and resulted in tonight's program being included. Moving on to the next tranche of funding, there's a lot of words and numbers on this page, and so I'm going to try to walk through this as straightforward as I can. Much of what you see in front of you, though, I will say, is actually supplementing existing programming that has already been stood up by the council. And so in most of these instances, we're either providing additional capacity or lengthening the period of time in which the existing programming will run. Starting at the top, the most notable example, as the mayor mentioned, is the rental assistance program, where we've still have tens of thousands of individuals, even as we're moving them off of the waiting list, who remain on the waiting list. This $7.5 million glued directly into supplementing our existing appropriations and philanthropic partnerships in this program. That program will now total $30 million, which is one of the largest city-run rent assistance programs in the country. And we are aware this will not be sufficient, more than likely, to address every single individual who has filed for rental assistance, and obviously individuals continue to file every day. But we do believe this will meaningfully allow us to continue to process applications through the end of the year, during which we hope Congress can act to provide additional funding or federal programming to address the need for rental assistance. In addition, there's a $7 million appropriation to stand up a new program. This is one of the few new programs that's included. This would be an analog to our rental assistance program, but federal guidance now allows us to utilize coronavirus relief funds to provide foreclosure prevention assistance as well. And quite simply, this is very similar to someone who contacts us and says that as a direct result of COVID-19, they're facing economic hardship and unable to make their rent. Same thing with mortgages. And so we are standing up programming. We're going to have more details on this in the coming week, but we're seeking community partnerships with this to very similar to our rental assistance program. There's also components of this that likely will address mortgage refinancing, which is individuals who aren't currently able to refinance to take advantage of lower interest rates, but doing so would permit them to continue making their mortgage payments. So this has been another topic of conversation with community partnerships, and we believe this $7 million appropriation will put us in a position to launch those programs here in the next week or two. In addition, I'll take the next two lines together because they're both directly related to a topic that I know has been of significant interest to the council, and that's the issue of how to best serve our neighbors who happen to be experiencing homelessness. And so this council has previously approved significant funding for non-congregate housing. Much of our shelter space in the city is not set up to properly socially distance. And so The state had launched back in the spring a non-congregate program in some area hotels in which individuals who were unsheltered could be housed temporarily, provided services in order to allow them to be socially distanced. When that state program wound down, the city stepped in and has continued funding it through prior appropriations. And this line item will allow us to continue that programming through the end of the year and providing that level of service. In addition to that, there's a $5 million appropriation here that will serve to bolster our service provider network that every year, even in what we consider a normal year, provide winter contingency services for our homeless neighbors. And as a result of that, we're expecting there to be great additional need for that this year because much of that winter contingency housing is based on congregate settings. It's based on space in which individuals are put together in large rooms, church basements, things such as that. We're going to need contingency for that this year. We're going to need additional service for those, additional resources for those service providers. And this funding will allow us to work with those service providers now to ensure that the winter contingency period that normally runs from November, December through April can be fully funded and adequate to protect those in need. The next few, they're kind of all over the place on this sheet, but there are 2 or 3 different line items dealing with food insecurity. These are all programs that have been set up previously by the council. I want to thank our partners, Gleaners, Midwest, Second Helpings. So you see the community distribution support, the Gleaners Meal School distributions, as well as home delivery food services for at-risk populations. This programming is already set up. It's already serving the community. These appropriations will simply extend those services through the end of the year and as far as we can take them, given the resources we have. And then there's a whole host of line items in here. I'm happy to answer questions from the council on them. I'm not going to go through each of them individually, but they largely deal with existing services and priorities that the council has articulated, whether that be internet connectivity in our schools, reentry credit repair, financial coaching, outreach to ensure that those who lack internet access or may not be able to take advantage of the online sign up for things like tenant outreach and eviction prevention are able to do that. These programs, whether they're being continued or just supplemented here, are included within the fiscal package. Moving on to our economic and small business recovery section. I would note most of these, again, are supplementing existing programming that the council has set up and fully funded. There are a couple of exceptions, though, that I will highlight. One is that the council has previously articulated a round of Music City Strategy Recovery Grants. This would allocate a second round of funding for music and entertainment venues in the city. As many councilors are aware, the chamber and the city had been collaborating on a Music City strategy prior to the outbreak of the global pandemic. And so that infrastructure has been reoriented to work with the Independent Venue Alliance and other organizations to provide funding, and this will provide a second round of that. In addition, we've been working with our partners at the Arts Council in which to identify ways to assist specifically smaller and community-based arts organizations that are obviously experiencing financial hardship during this time. So there's a $500,000 appropriation here for an emergency relief grant fund that would be administered by the Arts Council. That programming is still being put together, but it would be intended to be deployed in the coming months. There's some workforce development and education initiatives above that, but the biggest 2 allocations here that I want to speak to are the Rapid GED Equivalency Program Extension and the Small Business Assistance Grant Program. The GED Equivalency Program has actually been launched by the council previously. This is the 3rd tranche of funding, I believe. We have community partners at school systems, at universities. Employee ND has obviously been greatly assisting these efforts, but we have a number of individuals who were directly impacted by COVID-19, economically displaced, but lack the education or training in order to be immediately placed in jobs that may currently exist within our community. And so we have been utilizing these funds to rapidly reskill those individuals and get them reemployed as a result of the economic hardship facing them. This will continue that, a program that has already served more than 1,000 here in Marion County. And then finally, the Small Business Assistance Grant Program. As the mayor mentioned, the council has previously appropriated roughly $10 million through 2 different small business grant programs, in addition to a $2 million PPE reimbursement program for nonprofits, and authorizing up to $25 million in PPP loan liquidity through the Indy Chamber. We, however, have heard from a number of stakeholder groups, including the Restaurant and Lodging Association, the Downtown Recovery Task Force, others in the realm of the hospitality industry, that while our public health orders currently are allowing most types of establishments to operate at near full capacity, it's clear that they aren't enjoying near full capacity. That is a global problem, frankly. It's certainly an issue that we hope Congress takes up. But with the limited funds available to us, we really wanted to narrowly target this remaining small business assistance grant program on those businesses that are still having local health orders adversely impact their ability to operate at full capacity, specifically restaurants, bars, and entertainment venues, which, depending upon the week or month of the last few months, have either been fully closed or been asked to operate at somewhere between 25 and 50% capacity. So we're currently working with a number of stakeholder groups, the Capital Improvement Board, Visit Indy, a few of the industry and trade groups, to identify the best way to deploy these funds in the coming weeks. But it is our sense that this will be a prospective grant program. It will be targeting fixed expenses such as rent, mortgages, or utilities. And it will provide up to 3 months worth of assistance for affected businesses in an upfront grant that will hopefully allow for sufficient financial planning that these institutions can stay open through the end of the year. I want to be clear, this is not a panacea for these businesses. This is not going to provide longitudinal stability or even predictability. But we do believe that given the limited funding we have, it can be impactful in helping many of our small businesses within the hospitality industry stay open in the hopes that additional federal action will provide the level of certainty they need or the level of service they need in order to stay open as our public health crisis continues to require restrictions upon that area of business. Finally, there's 2 major appropriations requested within this fiscal ordinance as it relates to city-county government. The first is roughly $7 million in reimbursements for a number of capital investments that have been made by the Capital Improvement Board within the Indiana Convention Center. This public building has served not just as host to socially distant events over the last few months that have brought economic impact to our downtown, but also has stood at the ready to serve for public need as one of the largest venues in the city that can be utilized for socially distant activities. And so as a result of that, the CIB very early on took swift action in order to modernize its facilities in order to not just stay open now, but also be able to open in the future if needs existed. Those expenses total roughly $7 million and involve everything from the door handles being replaced to hand washing stations to wayfinding and reorienting ingress and egress to the building in order to ensure that it can be hosting individuals in a socially distanced way. And so this reimbursement will allow them to recoup those direct COVID expenses. I will say that just for the sake of context, we have a number of municipal corporations in the city of Indianapolis and Marion County. A number of them have received their own direct CARES Act appropriations. The airport and Indigo both received direct allocations through the CARES Act. The library has actually received, via council action, some COVID-related funding in prior council fiscal ordinances. The CIB has not received any funding thus far from any federal sources, and so this is our attempt in a way that makes sense to reimburse them for those hard capital expenses, even though obviously they continue to find ways in which to both make money and make their operations work during a time in which the building is largely unutilized due to the public health crisis. And then finally, there's a $30 million appropriation request for government operations reimbursement. And let me try to provide a little bit of context and definition for what that is. And then obviously we have officials from the administration, including Controller Ken Clark, who can offer more commentary or respond to questions. But recent federal guidance from the Treasury Department has permitted city-county government to reimburse itself for certain public health and public safety expenses that we've incurred this year as a result of COVID-19. And this is not in any way, shape, or form revenue replacement or funding that we are going to necessarily be able to specifically earmark for things like a rainy day fund. As the council is aware, we are anticipating our main revenue hit to occur over the next 2 years as income tax collections are distributed based on collections and arrears in Indiana. But we do believe that as we look forward, and we certainly recognize that there will likely be difficult fiscal decisions made, the ability to reimburse ourselves for certain public health and public safety expenses now will put us in a good position next year to hopefully avoid significant cuts to public health and public safety operations as a result of whatever economic downturn or budget decisions need to be made. And so this appropriation will be assessed across all of our public health and public safety entities, and we will be working to reimburse ourselves for those expenses over the next 100-odd days, with the idea that we can build up fund balance in many of these areas and provide ourselves some amount of cushion next year when we anticipate cuts to government service to be required to hopefully avoid those in some of the critical areas where residents expect services to not dip even during times of economic troubles. Final thing that I just note here is this isn't just about city-county government. This is really a set of appropriations that are the direct work of and will directly work for many of our community partners. And so I'm not going to read all of these aloud to all of you. These organizations that I know are very familiar to the community and to the council, but this is not a full and exhaustive list. There are a number of other organizations in the realm of education and workforce development that we haven't listed. We've tried to give you here, though, a general sense of the broad spectrum of community partners who are participating in our existing programming and would benefit from existing capacity and time on the programs that are either being launched or continued through tonight's appropriation. With that, Mr. President, myself and other members of the administration would be happy to take questions, and we appreciate the time this evening in order to present this and receive feedback from the council.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. I'd like to ask if there is a motion on proposal number 284.
Mr. President?
Yes.
Yeah, I would move to, for the passage of proposal 287.
Second.
All right, 284.
All right, 284.
All right, very good. And there's a motion and a second. Thank you very much.
Second.
Are there questions? All right. Mr. Mascari, Councilor Mascari.
Mr. President, this is just an off-the-wall question. What happens January 1st when the federal government says you couldn't spend that $500,000 or $2 million in that area? Do we owe that money back, or what do we do then? Because I know it's very hard to clarify what and how you're spending this money. But that's my question, is what will happen?
Deputy Mayor Cook?
You know, I appreciate that, Councilor Mascari. With permission, Mr. President, I have been told that with the controller in the room, I should let him speak on fiscal matters. And so I would like him to answer this question for his sake and mine, if that's all right.
Thank you, Councilor Mascari, for the question. If any dollars are spent, as is normal for federal guidance on federal grant money, it would be required to be paid back to the federal government. So if we spend anything that was not allowed by the U.S. Treasury guidance on the Coronavirus Relief Fund, we would be required to pay it back.
My question is, are we just committing this money until towards the end of the year, just to avoid that to happen? But if we spend it, then we're really kind of stuck.
If you're referring to if we get an extension, is that what you're asking? If we would get an extension, or if we spent it incorrectly?
If we spent it incorrectly, we would be responsible for paying it back, you're saying?
That's correct. That's correct. We would be. And I would just add that, you know, we've hired outside experts to make sure that we're reviewing this language to make sure and make certain that we do not spend any dollars inappropriately of the federal money that has been allocated to us through all the various funding sources through the CARES Act, including the coronavirus relief fund you're looking at tonight.
Okay, well, thank you very much for answering the question.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. I saw Councilor Barth.
Thank you, Mr. President. This question is for the controller as well, and it's a follow-up to Councilor Mascari's comment. I'm broadly supportive of this. I think everything that's in this is great and very important for our community. But following up on Councilor Mascari's comment, I did watch the State Budget Committee meeting this week, and one of the comments State Budget Director said was that there is a disagreement between the federal guidance from the Treasury and from the IG regarding payroll back paying. So tapping on to Chairman Mascari's question about risk, did I interpret that comment from the state level correctly, that there is disagreement on the federal guidance? And B, with that being true, assuming it's true, maybe it's not, do we feel confident in the risk level moving forward with this?
I appreciate the question, Councilor. If I could answer President Osili.
Please.
There absolutely have been a back and forth on the guidance constantly. And ever since the guidance came out in late April, we've received new frequently asked questions updates to that guidance. So it's not even full new guidance. It's literally just frequently asked questions that we have to review and comb through. The most recent guidance, they made that change in which COVID-related expenses for public safety, first responders, and public health were available for reimbursement to city county. We have reached out to numerous different sources to make sure that that can be done. I can tell you that that guidance will continue to change through the rest of the year, and we will hold on that official reimbursement and make sure we take care of that as more clarity comes. But we feel really very confident at this point that we can use it and use it appropriately. And we've had that shared from various sources that we have talked to.
So just to follow up, if I may, Mr. President.
Please.
So what you're saying is the broad set of guidance you've received is that this payroll payback for a municipal government is largely supported, but just to be confident, you're going to hold it to be sure that we can use it for that purpose until we have absolute confidence. So we as a council don't have much risk in making this allocation tonight. Would that be accurate? Okay.
Absolutely agree, Councilor. And of course, I'm ultimately responsible for these grant guidelines, as is my grants team. And so we're watching this really closely. I had another meeting just today talking through it. We still feel very confident based on the information we have that we can use it.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Controller. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Councilor Evans, I believe. Ethan Evans, you had a question?
Yes, thank you, Chairman Robinson. Sorry. Thank you, President Osili. I didn't have the screen up. So on the question of the $30 million for reimbursements, and I didn't have the presentation screen up. I don't know if you'd be able to put that screen back up for a minute, because I don't have access to it on my end. I just wanted to go over something really, okay, sorry.
Mr. Controller, are you able to put the screen back up?
Yeah, we're working on it right now. We'll get it back up.
Okay.
Sir.
Well, I'll just say on my end, I wanted to bring up the non-congregate housing point and homeless services, and how it could possibly be, fed into from, what would be the $30 million that I was seeing in the reimbursement fund on the far end. So I believe it was on the so right now, it's saying the $3,180,000 is non-congregate housing, the hotel program. But there was earlier, was it 7.2 million from federal funding going to rapid rehousing? Now, is that separate from CARES Act dollars?
The rapid rehousing would also be CARES Act dollars.
Okay. So now, could you just really quickly go over, I'm sorry, I know you went over, but like the $30 million for the reimbursements, like kind of like where those are going to specifically?
Sure. So let me clarify for you first, Councilor Evans, that those were CARES Act for the rapid rehousing, but it was out of a separate allocation. It was not coronavirus relief funds. It was housing and urban development funds. So just to be clear with you, different federal agency, different allocation that still came through the CARES Act.
Okay.
So just to make sure you're clear on that. On the $30 million and the government operations line item, there aren't dollars within that specific to these other programs. That's not the focus of those dollars. Those dollars are allocated for those first responders and public health payroll expenses in anticipation of getting a reimbursement for the expenses we've taken on. As I think you're all aware, and especially in March, April, and May, much of our fire department, police department was spending time specifically on COVID-related response. And so that really is focused on those dollars and reimbursing us for the money we spent on payroll expenses for that.
Okay, so I saw in the CRF appropriations portion, you had listed, or it was listed about 3.2 million for public safety overtime, and then 2 million for the local units allocations. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so would that be what you're referring to for the public safety units like IMPD and the other public safety organizations and reimbursements?
The $3.2 million in public safety overtime expense was for overtime required during the pandemic, especially in the early days of the pandemic, as we were spending an inordinate amount of time out on the street responding, especially the fire department, and what their role was. So that's what that $3.2 million was. What was your other line item you were questioning?
The local unit CRF allocations.
That local unit CRF allocation is for all of the other Marion County local units of government. So that would be township trustees' offices, the other included cities, excluded cities, those all received allocations from that local government relief that we provided.
Okay, so can I ask how did they calculate the 3.2 million, or was that sent in automatically?
Yeah, we worked with the Indianapolis Fire Department to calculate what their overtime expense was during the period of time that we were measuring, which at that point was the first 3 months, I believe, of the pandemic.
All right, so it's only fire department. It's not IMPD included in that as well.
That $3.2 million was based on the fire department.
Oh, okay. So what part of the 30 million then would cover the other public safety departments?
The $30 million is completely separate of the $3.2 million.
Oh,
so the $30 million, that $3.2 million was from an earlier appropriation. I think you're referring to the CRF.
Okay. So I guess I wanted to know if the 30 million would be for reimbursing the agency's responses during the early months. Could we get more specific with where those funds are going within said agencies? For example, we had specifically MCAT behavioral health units that would be going out in response to certain populations that could be, seen as more vulnerable to the pandemic, in Indianapolis, and they were going out on responses, and we had data from IMPD when they did the presentation last week that said 429 calls that went out. Could we determine how much of that money would be going to specifically those units? Could we get maybe assurances that they would be going on expanded calls to make sure that people who were being affected at a greater level by this pandemic, people experiencing mental health issues, people being left out, experiencing homelessness, would be able to have these services received at a higher level than they previously were because of this funding?
Yeah, I appreciate the question, Councilor Evans, and let me first say how important and understanding of the mental health issues that are related to COVID, and that is absolutely something incredibly important and could be looked at. What the focus for us and what we must do for the federal grants is we have to prove and use a formula in which we prove that it was COVID-related expense. specifically. For MCAT, for example, those are not calls where we said and asked the question, is this COVID related or not? We didn't have the ability, and we didn't track that specifically that way. And many calls aren't tracked that way. Instead, we have to use a formula that's defensible, which is really common in federal grants for us to be able to get after that $30 million of payroll expense. And so what we're going to look at specifically is we're going to look at March, April, and May, where we had an uptick. We can show overtime increase. We can show that we had more people out on the street. We can also show for some of those public safety entities that we had staff who actually contracted COVID and had to be off. Therefore, we had additional expenses to cover those shifts. And so we really have to have an incredibly defensible way to utilize that money and to get after it. And it doesn't mean that if we have information related to MCAT, we couldn't get reimbursement for it. We could. We're still working through the details of how exactly we're going to put that together and put together the reimbursement based on those specific 3 months where we had the highest number of employees and public safety first responders working on the issue.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Are there additional questions?
Yes, Mr. President.
Yes, Chairman Gray.
Yes, I just have two questions. The first part is a little three-part question, and the second part is very easy. On the small business part, how are you going to track those businesses? Who's going to be in charge of making that decision, and how are you going to make the decision?
Thank you, Councilor Gray. That's a great question. So right now, the specifics of the administration of the program are still being worked out. I think our general assumption, though, is that it will track how our previous small business assistance programs have worked. Both of our major small business assistance programs were administered by the Indy Chamber, and they essentially have reoriented a large portion of their staff in order to process these applications. They do a variety of things to check and make sure that the expenses being reported by the businesses are appropriate. They've also done specifically outreach in the past to ensure that we're reaching a wide spectrum of businesses across the city. And so obviously the Chamber has been before you previously to report on our minority and women business participation rates and some of their initial programs that you all funded that were well above average in many instances. And so in this case, I would say that we're going to probably replicate that effort since it's been previous in the past. Because this program, however, is relatively narrowly constrained to the hospitality industry, we are expecting that the overall diversity of the business pool likely will be somewhat impacted by the fact that we're only going to be talking about restaurants, bars, and entertainment venues. But I think the previous efforts we've made in that regard will be absolutely duplicated. Right now, we're working with the Capital Improvement Board to figure out who our administration partner will be. My assumption is that we will likely approach the Indy Chamber if they have capacity. They already have that infrastructure set up and are trained on the federal compliance side. But I would absolutely say that if counselors have thoughts on how we can ensure our community outreach initiative associated with that program is holistic and inclusive, we absolutely would love to have that conversation, because over the course of the next few days and through the end of the week, we're going to be putting pen to paper on just those very issues, and we'd love to have that conversation.
One last question. Over on page 5, it got there, it says you need to have an engagement of a consultant to assist the city county. Who is that consultant? Is it an hourly person or is it a contract person?
I am going to be completely honest with you, Councilor Gray. I am not sure which page 5 we are talking about here. Is this the Economic and Small Business Recovery slide, or is this a different document you're looking at, just out of curiosity?
This is the same one. It's the whereas page, proposal 284, page 5 in the document. And it says that you have to have engagement of a consultant to assist the city county in ensuring that all CRF expenditures satisfy federal requirements and to assist city county government. Yeah, I'd just like to know who that consultant is.
Yeah, so we've engaged a number of different entities. Some of them are actually prior engagements, and so we have a number of different things that we do to ensure compliance. We have our existing grants team, which obviously has a lot of federal experience. We have a previous government affairs contract through Bose Public Affair Group to provide federal lobbying. And so that's an engagement that we've had annually for the last 4 or 5 years. And they've been providing that service inclusive of our existing contract. In addition, we've been utilizing some federal assistance that was retained by the Indianapolis Public Improvement Bond Bank through Denton's Public Affairs in Washington, D.C. And on the compliance side, we've also retained some additional capacity in terms of individuals who do grant administration who have worked with us and community partners. Catherine Parker is one individual who's been assisting us in that regard. But most of those engagements actually were prior contracts that have been signed by the city. The actual present tense engagements we've had to supplement that have been rather limited.
Okay, I'm good.
Thank you, Councilor. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Are there additional questions? Councilor Boots.
Thank you, Mr. President. Appreciate the presentation this evening, Chief Cook, and I'm just a little concerned on the, I understand there's some legal hurdles involved, but a little concerned on the lack of additional funding and support for the mental and behavioral health issues facing us, and particularly with the current scaling back of the funding for the AIC to not provide any additional wraparound in mental health clinician services. So I just want to maybe, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but to ask what is the administration's current thinking on that area and their willingness to commit to expanding the funding for those, particularly the AIC and possibly also for the MCAT programs, expanding it as soon as practically possible and not having to just revisit these issues during next year's budget cycle.
No, I appreciate the question, Councilor Boots, and I know your sentiment has been echoed by a lot of your colleagues. And I'd say as a threshold matter, obviously tonight's appropriation deals with coronavirus relief funds, and just for the sake of not confusing the public, I think most of the issues you've raised are contained within the city-county budget. And so I think it's appropriate to raise them this evening, and I think I can address your question. I would say, though, that we have some analysis and review meetings upcoming for the city-county budget in which I would be better positioned to either personally address those or have them be addressed by the agencies involved. And I think one of the things that's most critical about the realm of mental health and the delivery of services is that, by and large, the city is not a service provider for any of those services. We rely not just on our community mental health centers, on nonprofit providers, but also Health and Hospital Corporation as a major partner, for example, in the operation of the Assessment and Intervention Center. And so I don't want to speak for those organizations. I can tell you from an administration standpoint, though, I know that there have been some concerns raised about the funding of the Assessment and Intervention Center. I know our team has been working today in preparation for the upcoming budget conversations and is going to be reaching out to individual counselors, I think, to answer those questions. Just as a matter of historical context, I would point out the Assessment and Intervention Center was the direct result of the mayor in 2016 in his first State of the City address, personally launching as a personal initiative the Criminal Justice Reform Task Force, which then resulted in the recommendation of the construction of the Assessment and Intervention Center, which was spearheaded by the mayor personally and included in all of our budget conversations by him at his request. And so, to the extent it offers comfort to the council, I don't know that the mayor would have spent the last 4.5 years personally spearheading one of the cornerstones of his criminal justice reform initiative to not fully fund it. I think it is absolutely the mayor's intention to continue to follow through on his personal work to bring the AIC to fruition. And obviously, if there are questions or concerns in the council, we look forward in upcoming private conversations and in budget committee meetings in addressing those concerns, because I think we share absolutely the passion that facility presents a great opportunity when it opens to help transform the criminal justice process here in Marion County. As it relates to MCAT, I know that has, again, been an issue that's been raised within the budget process. And obviously, there have been some questions as to whether CRF could be utilized to supplement our current MCAT operations. The short answer to that, based on a variety of legal opinions, is that for both legal and logistical reasons, it's incredibly difficult, if not effectively impossible, to deploy CRF money in that way. That being said, I can say to you personally, Councilor Boots, to your colleagues on the council who have raised this issue, the administration has absolutely heard loud and clear the requests from councilors and from community members that the expansion of the MCAT program is absolutely a present tense priority. And so we're in the process right now of analyzing the realities of the current pending budget. Obviously, tonight's appropriation is going to do some things to fund balances in our public safety agencies over the next few months that will likely impact kind of what operational sustainability looks like next year. But I will say we can fully commit to the council this evening that we are working diligently to deliver a proposal for an expanded MCAT service sometime in the next few days or weeks. And I know it's of great sensitivity to all of you to have that specificity be both public and to have it be soon. So we're working on that. I wish I could sit up here and articulate exactly how that will occur. But if nothing else, you have our commitment and the mayor's commitment that we've heard you all on that, and we'd like to deliver either expanded geography or expanded service in the MCAT program, or both, if possible, as soon as possible and within the timeline of our current city-county budget approval process.
Well, thank you, Chief Cook, and I appreciate and share those sentiments. I'll look forward to continuing those discussions. Thank you, Mr. President. No further questions.
Thank you very much, Councilor. Additional questions? Councilor Evans, Ethan Evans.
Thank you, President Osley. I wanted to just push back just a little bit slightly, and I appreciate the AIC, and I just wanted to give a slight correction on the history. I don't think a lot of people, when it was first proposed, thought that the Rubin Engagement Center would also be going by the wayside and being pushed into the AIC eventually. And as for this appropriation, I don't feel the most comfortable with where everything is going currently, and I do feel that we should be putting a more emphasis, as Councilor Boots and some other councilors have said tonight, on to more adequately funding the mental health care response and behavioral health, as well as more effective assistance for people experiencing homelessness, because those have been proven to be people experiencing more hardships in the face of this pandemic. And, we should be striving to use the dollars that we have and the dollars that we have been allocated to get the most out of those dollars in where we can see the greatest benefit to the most people. But I will be supporting this, but I hope that in the future, as Councilor Booth said, we will find ways to make better changes to our mental health care responses. And personally, I feel that we can get an MCAT response with solely mental health professionals and clinicians and community responses as well. So thank you.
Are there additional questions from councilors? I see none. If that's the case, then, Madam Clerk, let us do a roll call on proposal 284. Forgive me, Madam Clerk.
Yes.
This is public hearing. Are there comments that have come in from the public?
Yes, I have 12 comments.
Would you please read them?
Yes. First comment, Jim Rollinson. It is imperative that we support our independent cultural businesses at this time of crisis. Please support this to give them the much needed support and show our city's commitment to arts, music, and culture. Mina Keohane. Greetings. I support giving CARES funding to music venues through MFT. Thanks. Jesse Charles. I support giving CARES funding to music venues through Musical Family Tree. Adam Chavers. As an Arts Council board member, I am writing to express enthusiastic support for Proposal 284, 2020, including $500,000 in relief funding for Indianapolis nonprofit arts and cultural organizations administered in partnership with the Arts Council of Indianapolis. This will provide much needed relief for operating expenses, rent, utility, mortgage, and will help sustain organizations in urgent need of support due to the devastating impact and its extended nature of this crisis. We are grateful for City County Council's commitment to ensuring that Indy keeps creating and serving our community as we look to arts and culture to support our economic and emotional recovery. Thank you for your consideration and support of Proposal 284. Ernest Disney Britton. Theaters and youth serving arts organizations are in desperate need of relief to cover the cost of rent and utilities. These costs normally would have been covered by ticket sales and fees for classes, but that income has all but evaporated due to COVID-19. We ask the city to help by supporting Proposal 284. Daniel Porter. I support giving CARES funding to music venues through Music Family Tree. Adam Bonasier. Musical Family Tree has already done so much to help our local venues in their time of need. Live music is essential to Indy's atmosphere. I support continued CARES funding to venues through Musical Family Tree. Ben Leslie. I support a second round of CARES Act funding for local venues that can be distributed through Musical Family Tree. Gregory Wallace. As a member of the Arts Council of Indianapolis Board, I am writing to express enthusiastic support for Proposal 284, 2020, including $500,000 in relief funding for Indianapolis's nonprofit art and cultural organizations administered in partnership with the Arts Council of Indianapolis. This will provide much needed relief for operating expenses, rent, utilities, mortgage, and will help sustain organizations in urgent need of support due to the devastating impact and extended nature of this crisis. We are grateful for its City County Council's commitment to ensuring Indy keeps creating and serving our community as we look to arts and culture to support our economic and emotional recovery. Thank you for your consideration and support of Proposal 284. Sean Mullahan. As a longtime citizen of Indianapolis, active arts supporter, and Arts Council board member, I encourage each of you to support Proposal 248, which provides $500,000 of relief assistance to arts and cultural organizations throughout Marion County. This relief funding for rent, utilities, and mortgage payments gives these organizations a fighting chance to survive the world pandemic, keeps a large sector of our economy employed, and most importantly, will add to and provide our community with world-class performances once the pandemic restrictions are lifted. Thanks for your consideration. Julie Goodman. On behalf of the 100 plus nonprofit arts and cultural organizations we represent and the 30,000 artists' jobs supported by Indy's creative economy, the Arts Council of Indianapolis wants to express our full support and deep appreciation for City County Council's plan to include $500,000 in CARES Act funding for our nonprofit arts and cultural organizations as part of proposal number 284. The Arts Council is honored to partner with the city to administer these funds through an equitable grant program, supporting our nonprofit arts and cultural organizations with rent, mortgage, and utility relief. Our sector is facing devastating losses, averaging 8.6 million monthly due to closures and the extended nature of this crisis. We are entering a danger zone of sustainability for our most vulnerable arts partners, and Proposal 284 will help to ensure the ability to restart our economy and reopen Indianapolis with the arts and cultural assets, experiences, and related economic and emotional impact our city needs and values. The city has been a significant partner in our recovery efforts, and we are incredibly grateful for the inclusion of nonprofit arts and cultural organizations in Proposal 284. Thank you for your consideration and commitment to ensure Indy keeps creating with approval of this support. Together, we will restart and recover with Indy's arts partners and artists to be even stronger, safer, more innovative, more equitable, more inclusive, more engaged with the residents and visitors we serve. Our final comment comes from Josh Baker. On behalf of the Indiana Independent Venue Alliance, we support this proposal. Our Marion County Independent Live Music venues are grateful for the initial support awarded by the City of Indianapolis. Being one of the hardest hit industries and facing mandated enforced closures, our venues are operating at 90 to 100% loss of revenue for the last 6 months. Though the forecast changes daily, current projections put late 2021 through 2022, as the time period for recovery. Without any support, these venues will close, and the economic impact, tourism, jobs, and tax contributions they provide will be gone. The initial award was a great starting point. However, these small businesses are facing insurmountable debt and having their ability to operate restricted, either mandating closure, capacity restrictions, or type of activities they are allowed to host. On behalf of our members, we support this proposal with the request additional funding being awarded to these venues as an investment in rebuilding. Mr. President, this concludes the comments.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And while you're still talking, let us go to roll call on Proposal 284.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Adamson.
Councilor Adamson, aye.
Councilor Ane.
Councilor Ane, aye.
Councilor Bain.
Thank you, Mr. President. Due to a perceived conflict of interest, I respectfully abstain.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Barth.
Barth, aye.
Councilor Boots.
Councilor Boots, aye.
Councilor Brown.
Councilor Brown, aye.
Councilor Carlino.
Counselor Carlino, aye.
Councilor Dilk.
Councilor Dilk, aye.
Councilor Ethan Evans.
Councilor Ethan Evans.
Councilor Jared Evans.
Councilor Jared Evans, aye.
Councilor Graves.
Councilor Graves, aye.
Thank you. Councilor Gray. Councilor Gray.
Did you get it?
We didn't hear your vote.
Aye.
Thank you. Councilor Hart.
Councilor Hart, aye.
Thank you. Councilor Jackson.
Councilor Jackson, aye.
Councilor Jones.
Councilor Jones, aye.
Councilor Larison.
Councilor Larison, aye.
Councilor Lewis.
Counselor Lewis, aye.
Counselor Mascari,
Counselor Mascari, aye.
Counselor McCormick,
Hello, Councilor McCormick. Aye.
Counselor Mowry,
Counselor Mallory, aye.
Counselor Oliver, Counselor Oliver, I'll return. Counselor Osley,
Counselor Oakley, aye.
Counselor Potts,
Counselor Potts, aye.
Counselor Ray,
Counselor Ray, aye.
Counselor Robinson,
Counselor Robinson, aye.
Counselor Oliver, Counselor Oliver, I don't think Counselor Oliver can hear us. Mr. President, that makes, 23 yay, 1 abstention, 1 non-vote.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Clerk. The last item on our agenda is announcements and adjournment. The docketed agenda for this meeting of the council having been completed, the chair will now entertain motions for adjournment.
Mr. President,
Chair recognizes Councilor Mowry.
Mr. President, I have been asked to offer the following motion for adjournment by Counselor Osley in memory of Georgia Lee Ramsey, by Counselor Ane in memory of James W. Long, Jean Dillon, Paul E. Dickus, Wanda M. Littler, Eleanor M. Coverstone, and John Jack David Shockley. Mr. President, I would like to move the adjournment of this meeting of the Indianapolis City County Council in recognition of and respect for the life and contributions of those persons I have specifically named. I respectfully ask the support of fellow councilors. I further request that the motion be made a part of the permanent records of this body and that a letter bearing the council seal and the signature of the president be sent to the family of each person advising of this action.
Thank you, Councilor Mowry. And I want to say thank you to fellow councilors for making yourselves available tonight for the special meeting. No further motions. We are adjourned.